By early September, Lochdubh had discovered honey. Jars appeared in shop windows, heather was tied to anything that stood still, and several villagers began speaking confidently about bees, despite having avoided them all their lives. The new heather honey trail promised late-season visitors, useful grant money, and photographs of a community working happily together. It was all very wholesome, perhaps a little too wholesome. In Lochdubh, even honey can taste bitter when too many hands try to claim the sweetness. For the moment, however, Hamish Macbeth had a more immediate concern. A damp patch on his cottage wall had grown large enough to resemble Scotland. Chapter 1. Jars in the window. The damp patch had acquired the Hebrides overnight. Hamish stood before it with a mug of tea, studying the dark shape spreading across the plaster. A drop gathered near what might have been Inverness and slid towards the skirting board. Lugs watched from beside the stove. "It is under control," Hamish said. The drop landed in the saucepan beneath it. Lugs lowered his head onto his paws. Hamish needed roof sealant. What he did not need was a roofer, because roofers brought ladders, estimates, and the expectation of being paid promptly. He walked down to Patel's shop through a cool morning mist. The heather above Lochdubh was still purple, and the village smelled faintly of peat smoke and rain. Patel's window had been transformed. Honey jars stood among ribbons and sprigs of heather beneath a painted sign, "Lochdubh Heather Honey Trail." Behind them was the large yellow head of a school bee costume. Its wide eyes suggested that the bee had been told something alarming. Morag Bain stood outside with a clipboard. "It creates family appeal," she said when she saw Hamish looking. "Does someone have to wear it? We have volunteers. Do the volunteers know?" Morag ignored this. She chaired the new honey cooperative and dressed for the role in a green waterproof coat and spotless white trainers. Everything about Morag suggested organisation, including the careful way she smiled before disagreeing. Inside, Mrs. Patel took the empty sealant tube from Hamish. "You said the damp was small." "It was small when I first noticed it." "How large is it now?" "Roughly Scotland." Mrs. Patel put a fresh tube beside the till. "You need a roofer." "I need this." "You need feeding, supervision, and a roofer." Before Hamish could defend himself, Ewan Kerr entered carrying a crate of honey jars. Ewan was a broad young handyman with untidy dark hair and the permanent expression of a man expecting criticism. "Where?" he asked. Morag pointed to the tasting counter. "Carefully. The photographer will be here tomorrow. I always carry jars carefully. You broke 6 last month. The crate handle came off. You repaired it. After it came off, Mrs. Patel directed him to the counter before the discussion could become historical. The jars had cream labels decorated with purple heather and a golden bee. They looked expensive, local, and exceptionally well-behaved. Hamish picked one up. 3 jars, said Mrs. Patel. I was only looking. You can look after you buy. A silver hire car stopped outside. Dr. Lydia Vane entered, wearing a camel coat and clean brown boots. She was tall, elegant, and composed, with pale hair cut neatly at her jaw. Hamish recognised her from a television programme about regional food, though he could not remember whether she had praised the food or exposed it. Morag hurried forward. "Dr. Vane! Welcome to Lochdubh! What a remarkable setting!" Lydia said, looking beyond the window towards the harbour. Morag brightened. "You have a great deal to work with." Morag's expression became more cautious. Lydia studied the display. "Charming." Mrs. Patel smiled pleasantly. "We were hoping for good." Hamish looked down. At the tasting counter, Lydia sampled the first honey, then the second. Everyone watched her swallow, as if waiting for a medical result. "Strong heather note," she said. "A little smoke. Rather traditional." "That is our prize jar," said Morag. "Produced through the community hives." "Who extracted it?" "The cooperative manages production collectively." "Who, specifically?" Morag adjusted her clipboard. "We have a flexible system." Ewan looked away. Lydia examined the jar's handwritten batch number. "And the records?" "In the honey shed." "I shall look at them later." The remark was mild, But Morag's smile tightened. Beside the jars lay a smoker, a hive tool, and several queen-marking pens. Lydia picked up the blue one. "This leaks." "I told them," Ewan said. "You said it still worked," Morag replied. "It does work. It also leaks." Lydia removed the cap. A bright blue spot appeared on her finger. She explained that beekeepers used a small coloured dot to identify the queen among thousands of workers. "Does the queen mind?" Mrs. Patel asked. "I imagine she considers it an occupational inconvenience." Lydia replaced the cap. A tiny drop of paint fell onto the lid of the prize honey jar. Morag reached for a cloth. "Leave it," Lydia said. "It spoils the jar. It identifies it. We already have labels. A mark made in front of witnesses can be more reliable than a label." For the first time, Morag looked genuinely uneasy. The shop telephone rang. Mrs. Patel handed it to Hamish. Blair's voice arrived at full volume. "I've heard about this honey circus. It is a tourist trail. It's councillors, grant people, and some television woman. Keep it under control. There may also be bees. Do not get clever, Macbeth. I don't want another village pantomime." Hamish looked at the giant bee head in the window. "I can make no promises." Blair hung up. "His warmest wishes," Hamish announced. "No," said Mrs. Patel. "They were not." Lydia lifted the marked jar towards the window. Autumn light passed through the dark amber honey. "Beautiful colour," she said. "Our finest," Morag replied. "Perhaps." Outside, rain began softly over the harbour. Inside, every ribbon was straight, every label faced forward, and every jar appeared exactly where it belonged. Except for the small blue dot on the lid. Hamish noticed Morag looking at it again. Mrs. Patel placed 3 jars, and the roof sealant, in a paper bag. "I ordered 1 jar. You need proper food. Honey is not a meal. It is closer than whatever you usually eat." Hamish left carrying enough honey for several winters. Behind him, Lydia asked Morag who actually filled the jars. Morag took a little too long to answer. Chapter 2. The Hives on the Hill. By 2 o'clock, the rain had stopped without improving the weather. A dozen people gathered outside the old schoolhouse for the first official walk of the Lochdubh Heather Honey Trail. Morag handed out printed guides while explaining that the path was accessible in suitable footwear. Mrs. Wellington looked down at the mud surrounding her polished shoes. "You might have printed that before we arrived." The group set off uphill through wet heather. Midges gathered with an enthusiasm absent from most village committees. Hamish walked near the rear with Ewan, who carried a smoker, 2 veils, and the expression of a man performing unpaid labour, despite being paid very little. Ahead, Lydia questioned Morag about hive numbers and annual yield. "We began with 3 colonies," Morag said. "We now have 6 community hives. And how much honey did they produce last season?" "I would need to check the exact figure. It should be in the grant application." Morag stopped to help Mrs. Wellington over a muddy patch she had already crossed safely. The official hives stood beyond a new wooden gate. They had been painted in soft shades of green, blue, and cream. Each bore a small brass plaque naming a sponsor. One read, "Supported by the Highland Futures Fund." Another thanked a hotel 30 miles away that had never served Lochdubh honey. "They look lovely," said Mrs. Wellington. "That is rather the difficulty," Lydia replied. Morag laughed uncertainly. Lydia put on a veil and opened the first hive with Ewan's help. She lifted a frame, examined it, then another. The bees moved sluggishly. "How long has this colony been here?" "Since spring," said Ewan. "Which spring?" "This one." Lydia looked towards Morag. "And these are the hives producing the jars in the village?" "They are part of the production." "How large a part?" Morag began speaking about collective effort, bee-friendly planting, and future capacity. Lydia replaced the frame. "The colony is weak. There is very little stored honey, and these frames are almost new. We had a difficult summer," Morag said. "So did every beekeeper in the region." At the next hive, Lydia found much the same. The boxes were clean, the plaques polished, and the honey scarce. Hamish watched Morag smiling for the photographer. She kept turning slightly so the sponsor signs remained visible behind her. Could the honey have come from the other hives? He asked. Morag's smile stayed in place. What other hives? A voice answered from above them. The ones with bees in them. An elderly woman stood behind a sagging wire fence farther up the slope. She wore a waxed coat tied with string and held a dented smoker in one hand. Grey hair escaped from beneath a knitted cap. "Serenade," said Morag brightly. "How fortunate! There's no fortune in hearing folk talk nonsense from half a hillside away." Serenade Bell climbed through a gap in the fence rather than using the gate beside it. Morag introduced her as one of the traditional voices within the cooperative story. Serenade looked at her. "Am I?" Lydia removed her veil. "You keep hives farther up?" 40 years. "How many colonies?" 8, when they behave. 7, when they don't. "May I see them?" Morag stepped forward. "We do have a schedule. Bees seldom respect those," said Lydia. Serenade's hives stood behind her cottage garden, among nettles, old timber, and flowering herbs. None matched. One box leaned slightly. Another had been repaired with a strip of roofing tin, and faded names had been painted across several lids. The bees were busy. Lydia opened a hive with Serenade beside her. The old woman watched every movement and corrected her only once. "Not that frame." "Why?" "The corner's loose." Lydia chose another. The comb was dark and heavy. Honey shone beneath the wax. "This is excellent," Lydia said. "It is honey," Serenade replied. "That is generally the intention." Lydia smiled. The official photographer tried to arrange Serenade beside a sponsor plaque visible downhill. "No," Serenade told him. "It will only take a moment. So does falling in a ditch." He lowered the camera. Lydia examined another frame. "This has the same smoky note as the prize jar." Morag began brushing an imaginary speck from her sleeve. "The whole slope shares forage. Floral character, perhaps. Extraction character does not grow on heather." Serenade gave Lydia a sharper look. "You know your business." "I make a living correcting people who believe they know theirs." "That sounds tiring." "It is mostly tiring for them." Hamish noticed Ewan smiling behind his veil. Lydia asked Serenade where she extracted her honey. "In the shed, behind the school." "The cooperative shed?" "It was just the honey shed, until folk put a sign on it." "And who fills the jars?" Serenade shrugged. "Whoever Morag has organised. Ewan moves the boxes. I bring the supers down. Morag sees to selling. And the labels? Used to print my own." Morag spoke quickly. "Serenade's methods were not suitable for retail development. We created a unified identity so everyone could benefit." Serenade looked downhill towards the neat official hives. "Everyone?" The photographer pretended to adjust his lens. Lydia turned to Hamish. "Who has access to the extraction shed?" "Morag, Ewan, Serenade, and the school caretaker, I expect." "And who prints the current labels?" Morag answered before Hamish could. "A firm in Inverness." "Who sends them the batch information?" "I do." Lydia nodded slowly. "I shall need the invoices, extraction dates, and jar totals. We are launching tomorrow. Then today is an excellent time to find them." Morag's voice remained pleasant. "Is there a concern?" "There is a difference between concern and arithmetic." The group began walking back downhill. Mrs. Wellington complained about the path, the midges, and the absence of a proper handrail on open moorland. Serenade remained by her hives. Hamish lingered. "Are you part of this cooperative, Serenade?" "I signed something." "Did you read it?" "I tried. It used the word sustainability 9 times and honey twice." "Do the jars carry your name?" "They used to." Below them, Morag called for Hamish to join the official photograph. He looked towards the painted hives, their sponsor plaques shining against the wet wood. Then he looked back at Serenade's battered boxes, alive with bees and entirely absent from the brochures. Lydia was watching them too. When she caught Hamish's eye, she said quietly, "Those new hives could not fill half the jars I saw this morning." "You're sure?" "I judge honey, Sergeant. I also count." Morag called again. Lydia started down the slope. And someone here, she added, is hoping nobody else does. Chapter 3. Cakes, compliments, and small cruelties. The official launch tea began at 6 in the old schoolroom. Morag had arranged floral napkins, bowls of heather, and a row of honey cakes beneath a sign reading, "Sweetness from the heart of Lochdubh." Mrs. Patel read it twice. "Honey comes from bees," she said. "It is symbolic," Morag replied. "Then it should say, symbolic honey." Villagers filled the room in damp coats, speaking in the restrained tones used when everyone had come to inspect the same scandal, but no scandal had yet been officially announced. Sioned Bell sat near the back with her coat still on. She had refused a name badge. "I know who I am," she told Morag. "The badges help visitors." "Then put one on the visitors." Ewan carried trays from the kitchen. Each time he passed Lydia, he watched her as though expecting another question he would rather not answer. Hamish noticed that Morag watched him watching. Lydia stood beside the tasting table, elegant and composed, answering questions from 2 councillors and a woman from the Pollinator Grant Committee. She had changed into a dark green jacket. The blue stain from the queen-marking pen remained faintly visible on one finger. At 6:30, Morag tapped a spoon against a teacup. "Thank you all for supporting this celebration of local skill, sustainability, and shared purpose," Sionade murmured. "There's the word again." "What word?" asked Mrs. Wellington. "Sustainability. Means someone wants money." Morag introduced Lydia as a nationally respected authority on honey, bees, and rural enterprise. Lydia stepped forward. She began pleasantly enough, speaking about heather moorland, short flowering seasons, and the difficulty of producing genuine heather honey. Then she turned towards the jars. "Authenticity matters," she said. "Not because every product must be rustic or imperfect, but because people deserve to know what they are buying and whose work they are buying." Morag's smile became fixed. Lydia lifted a jar. "This honey is excellent. Dense, aromatic, and traditionally extracted. It has character." A murmur of approval passed through the room. "It is also," Lydia continued, "unlikely to have come in any meaningful quantity from the new community hives we inspected today." The approval vanished. One of the councillors lowered his cake. Morag stepped forward. "The honey represents the whole cooperative." "Does it?" Lydia asked. Her voice was not loud, but it carried. She turned towards Sionade. "Mrs. Bell's colonies are strong. Her methods are untidy, old-fashioned, and very good. The prize honey tastes like the honey from her hives." Everyone looked at Sionade. The old woman's face reddened. "I didna ask for a speech." "It was praise," said Lydia. "Praise can still make a spectacle of a person." For the first time, Lydia seemed uncertain. "Then I apologize." Sionade gave a small nod and looked down at her tea. Hamish saw the irritation leave Lydia's face. She was exacting, but not entirely without shame. Morag recovered quickly. "Sionade has always been part of our shared journey." Sionade looked up. "You took my name off the jars." The room became very quiet. Morag's cheeks coloured. "We created a unified identity. You agreed that broader marketing would improve sales. I agreed you could sell them. You signed the cooperative papers. I signed papers so I wouldn't have to attend meetings like this." A few people looked into their cups. Ewan entered carrying a fresh pot of tea and struck the edge of a chair. The pot tilted, and tea splashed across the tray. Morag closed her eyes briefly. Lydia turned to him. "You move the honey from Mrs. Bell's hives?" "Sometimes." "And the supers from the community hives?" "Ah, yeah. Do you keep the extraction dates?" "Morag does." "Who records which honey comes from which hive?" Ewan set the pot down too sharply. "I carry boxes. I repair doors. I'm no the clerk. You handle the frames." "That doesn't mean I write a book about every bee." Blair arrived at that moment, bringing cold air and tobacco smell into the room. He looked around at the flowers and cakes. "What is this, Macbeth?" "A launch tea. It looks like a funeral organised by a garden centre." Morag hurried to greet him. Blair removed his wet coat and immediately found Ewan standing in the narrow passage beside a stack of empty crates. "Shift those. I'm taking them out. You're blocking the way. I was waiting for you to move." Blair stared at him. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" Ewan's jaw tightened. Hamish stepped closer. "He knows fine, Blair. The noise helps." Blair turned. "What did you say?" "I said the room's crowded." Hamish's voice had softened, the sibilance sharpening beneath it. For a moment, Blair looked ready to make an issue of it. Then he noticed the councillors and the Grant representative watching him. He pushed past Ewan instead. The crate struck Ewan's sleeve, leaving a faint smear of old blue paint against the wood. Lydia saw it. "Queen marker paint? Box paint," Ewan said. "I marked the old hive lids last week." "You used the same blue?" "It was what we had." Morag gave him a warning look. Lydia picked up the prize jar and removed the lid. She smelled the honey, then asked Mrs. Patel for a clean spoon. "What now?" Morag said. "Moisture. We had the honey tested." "Where are the results?" "In the shed. So are the extraction records, apparently." Lydia tasted the honey once more. "The floral note is mature. The moisture level is too stable for honey recently taken from those new hives, even if they had produced enough, which they did not." Morag folded her hands. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that your labels tell a simpler story than your bees." The Grant representative stopped writing. Morag lowered her voice. "Could we discuss this privately?" "Yes. In the extraction room. Tomorrow morning would be more convenient." "This evening?" Ewan looked from Lydia to Morag. "The shed latch is sticking," he said. "I repaired it," Morag replied. "You asked me to repair it. I have not done it yet. I used it yesterday." "You had to lift the door while turning the key." Morag's smile returned, thin and controlled. "Then perhaps you can open it for us." "I'm finished for the day." Lydia placed the lid back on the jar. "I shall manage." She turned to Hamish. "Will you be nearby this evening, Sergeant?" "I usually am. It is a small village." "Good." Morag began gathering empty cups, though several still contained tea. The speeches ended soon after that. People left in groups, carrying honey cakes wrapped in napkins and new versions of what they had heard. By the time Mrs. Wellington reached the door, Lydia had accused the cooperative of fraud. By the time the councillors reached their car, Seanade had accused Morag of theft. Neither statement had actually been made. Hamish helped Mrs. Patel stack the cups. Across the room, Lydia buttoned her coat. "I'll see the shed at 8, she told Morag. Morag did not look at her. "Of course." Lydia left. Rain tapped softly against the schoolroom windows. Seanade remained seated at the back, turning her untouched name badge between her fingers. Hamish looked towards the dark yard behind the schoolhouse, where the honey shed stood beyond the reach of the lamps. The village had spent months making everything appear sweet. Now everyone was waiting to learn what had been put beneath the label. Chapter 4. The Honey Shed. At 6 the next morning, Hamish was woken by knocking. Not urgent knocking. Lochdubh people rarely wasted panic before breakfast. This was 3 firm knocks. A pause, then 3 more. Luggs raised his head from beside the stove. Hamish pulled on his uniform trousers and opened the door. Ewan Kerr stood outside, pale beneath the mud on his face. "You need to come." "What's happened?" "It's Dr. Vane." Hamish reached for his jacket. "Where?" "The honey shed." The yard behind the old schoolhouse was grey with dawn. Rainwater shone between the stones, and mist covered the upper slopes. Ewan walked ahead quickly, but stopped several yards from the shed. The door stood half open. "I came to fix the latch before the launch," he said. "Morag wanted it done early. Did you go inside?" "1 step. Then I saw her." Hamish told him to remain outside. The honey shed was small, with whitewashed walls and shelves, built from old schoolroom timber. A stainless steel extractor stood in one corner. Buckets, sieves, and empty jars filled the others. Lydia Vane lay beside a fallen stool. There was no violence in the scene at first glance, only stillness. Her green jacket was folded beneath one shoulder, almost as though someone had tried to make her comfortable. Several sheets of cream jar labels had scattered across the floor. Hamish crouched without touching anything. A dark bruise showed near Lydia's temple. Beside the stool lay a short wooden handle from a honey press. Whether it had struck her or merely fallen with her was not immediately clear. Bees tapped softly against the small window, drawn by traces of honey on the glass. Hamish checked for a pulse, though he knew there would be none. He stepped back outside. Ewan was staring at the ground. "She's dead?" "Aye. I never touched her." "I didna ask whether you had." "You were going to." "No. Blair will do that often enough for both of us." Hamish sent Ewan to wait in the schoolroom and telephoned Strathbane. Blair arrived 40 minutes later with Detective Constable Macnab, a photographer, and the energy of a man who had already decided somebody else was responsible. He pushed through the yard gate. "Where's the body?" "Inside." "And the suspect?" "In the schoolroom." Blair stopped. "You have a suspect?" "I have Ewan." "Who found her?" Blair smiled without warmth. "Same thing often enough." "Only in your reports." Blair entered the shed and emerged less than 2 minutes later. "Accident," he announced. "Fell from the stool and cracked her head." Macnab looked past him towards Hamish. Hamish said nothing. Blair frowned. "What? You have not seen the medical examiner." "I have eyes." "So did Dr. Vane." Blair swore and went inside again. This time he remained longer. When he came out, he said, "Possible assault." "A quick recovery," Hamish observed. "Where's Kerr?" "Schoolroom. He argued with her last night. So did half the committee." "He had the key?" "So did Morag and Cyanide." "He has paint on his sleeve." Hamish looked at him. Blair pointed towards the shed. "Blue paint. Same colour as the marks inside." That interested Hamish. He returned to the shed while the photographer worked. The room smelled of wax, damp wood, and old smoke. The stool had fallen near the extractor, but Lydia's coat showed no scrape from the metal rim. A cup stood on the workbench, with a little cold tea at the bottom. The smoker sat beside it. Hamish touched the outside carefully. Cold! Ewan had said Lydia intended to inspect the shed at 8. Someone had told Mrs. Wellington that smoke had been seen behind the schoolhouse late in the evening. Yet the smoker contained only dry ash and had not been used recently. The scattered labels looked accidental until Hamish examined them more closely. Some were printed for the dark heather honey. Others were for wildflower jars. The sheets had been mixed together, though Morag's system everywhere else was almost painfully orderly. One half-used sheet had been placed upside down beneath the stool. Hamish moved towards the door. The old latch required the door to be lifted before it would close properly. Ewan had demonstrated that the previous afternoon. Someone had wiped the outer handle. The metal showed broad, dull streaks. The inside edge had been missed. There, close to the wood, were 2 tiny dots of bright blue paint. Not smears. Dots. Hamish leaned closer. A hive tool rested on a shelf beside the door. It had been placed neatly on a folded cloth, though every other tool in the shed had been dropped into a bucket. Another blue dot marked its handle. Macnab came to stand behind him. "Queen marker? Looks like it." Ewan had blue on his jacket. "Old box paint, dull and spread over the cloth." Hamish pointed to the latch. "This is fresh." Macnab studied the marks. "Someone handled the pen in here. After the inspection yesterday, likely. Why put paint on the latch?" "To make us notice it." Macnab glanced at the carefully positioned hive tool. "And that." "Same reason." Blair appeared in the doorway. "What are you two whispering about?" "Your evidence," said Hamish. Blair examined the dots. "There. Kerr's paint. It is not the same paint. It is blue." "The sea's blue, Blair. We do not arrest it whenever someone drowns." Blair's face reddened. "He had access, motive, and a temper." "What motive?" She humiliated him. She asked about extraction dates. To a man like Kerr, that might be humiliation. Hamish's voice became very soft. "A man like Kerr?" Blair heard the warning and stepped closer. "A labourer with a record of fighting. One fight 6 years ago, after 3 men cornered his brother outside a pub. He still did it." "And you still keep telling the story because it saves you learning a new one." Macnab looked away. Blair pointed towards the schoolroom. I'm questioning him. You will question everyone with a key. I decide that. Then decide it before the grant committee arrives and asks why you arrested the handyman while the co-op chair walked home. Blair glared at him, but the reference to the committee had its effect. Hamish continued searching. Beneath the workbench he found the cap of the blue Queen marking pen. A thin line of paint had leaked around its rim. The pen itself was missing. On the shelf above stood 6 sample jars. 5 had untouched labels. The space beside them was clean and round where a 6th jar had recently stood. Hamish remembered Lydia holding the prize jar to the window in Patel's shop, the tiny blue mark on its lid. Was she carrying honey when she left the tea? He asked. Macnab shook his head. I don't know. Find out. Outside, Morag Bain hurried across the yard in a raincoat thrown over her nightdress. Sinead followed at a slower pace, hatless and grim. What happened? Morag demanded. Blair blocked her path. This is now a murder inquiry. 10 minutes earlier, it had been an accident. Hamish let that pass. Morag stared at the shed. Lydia? No one answered. Sinead closed her eyes briefly. Then she looked at Morag and asked, Did you meet her here last night? Morag's face changed. Only for an instant. But Hamish saw it. I went home after the tea, she said. That wasna what I asked. Blair turned towards her. Hamish looked back through the doorway at the mixed labels, the cold smoker and the bright blue dots placed where they were meant to be found. Someone had tried to make the room tell a simple story. The trouble with simple stories was that they often required too much arranging. Chapter 5. Blair chooses the lad. Blair questioned Ewan in the old schoolroom beneath a row of children's paintings of Highland cows. The cows looked cheerful. Ewan did not. Hamish remained by the window while Macnab took notes. Blair sat opposite Ewan, with the blue-painted sleeve sealed in an evidence bag on the table between them. You threatened Dr. Vane, Blair said. I argued with her. You raised your voice. She kept asking the same question. Which question? Who handled the honey? And why did that annoy you? Because I had answered. I move the boxes. I clean the extractor. I repair what Morag tells me is broken. You have a key to the shed. Aye. You knew Dr. Vane would be there. So did everyone at the tea. Blair leaned forward. You were embarrassed in front of the village. Then she found out you'd mishandled the hives. I didna mishandle them. She said the colonies were weak. I told Morag not to split them before spring. Morag, seated near the door, stiffened. That is not relevant, she said. Blair turned on her. You'll speak, when asked. She lowered her eyes but continued gripping her clipboard, though no paper remained on it. Ewan looked at Hamish. The new hives were for the grant photographs. Morag wanted 6 boxes instead of 3. I said weak colonies would look worse than strong ones. You still did it, Blair said. I'm paid to follow instructions. And you resent that? Sometimes. Blair smiled, as if resentment were nearly a confession. Hamish watched Ewan's hands. They were scratched and stained from work, the nails dark with old paint and propolis. When angry, Ewan rubbed the scar across his knuckle with his thumb. He had done so at the launch tea, and was doing it now, but his answers came quickly. He did not pause before mentioning the hives, the keys, or the argument. Whatever he feared, it was not discovery of those facts. Where were you at 8 last night? Blair asked. At home. Alone? Yeah. Convenient. I didna arrange it for your benefit. Blair slapped one palm against the table. You were seen near the schoolhouse at 7:30. I took the empty crates to the shed. And waited for Lydia Vane? No. I left. Through which door? There is only one door. Hamish straightened. What time did you lock it? Ewan glanced at him. Maybe 20 to 8. Did you lift the door? Aye. You have to lift it while turning the key. From outside? Of course. Blair frowned. What does that matter? Hamish did not answer. Blair returned to the paint. This sleeve puts you inside that shed. The paint is from hive boxes. It matches marks on the latch. It does not, Hamish said. Blair's jaw tightened. To the naked eye, it does. Then perhaps you're naked eye needs spectacles. Macnab covered a cough. Hamish placed photographs of the latch and Ewan's sleeve on the table. The paint on the cloth is dried box paint. It has soaked into the fibres and collected dirt. The marks on the latch are small, bright drops from the Queen pen. Both blue, Blair insisted. So are your veins, and Morag's waterproof coat. That doesna make them the same. Morag looked down at her green sleeve. Hamish pointed to the photograph. The dots are on the inside edge. Ewan says he locked the shed from outside before Lydia arrived. He could have returned. Then why lock it first? To create an alibi. What alibi? No one saw him leave. Blair's face darkened. Hamish continued. If Ewan wanted the marks found, he could have put paint on the outside handle. Instead, the drops sit where a person closing the door from inside might touch the latch while holding a leaking pen. Macnab nodded. And if Lydia was already inside? He asked. Someone else entered after her, or was waiting there. Ewan stared at the photograph. I never saw that pen in the shed. Did you take it from Patel's shop? Hamish asked. No. Morag collected the equipment after the tasting. Morag's head rose. I put everything into a basket and brought it to the schoolroom. Did you check the pens? No. Why would I? Because one is missing, said Hamish. Blair stood abruptly. This proves nothing. Kerr had the key, no alibi and a temper. It proves your paint evidence is weak. It is stronger than village gossip and your feelings. Hamish's voice softened. You've chosen Ewan because he looks angry when frightened. That is not the same as guilt. I choose suspects on evidence. You choose them on convenience. The room went still. Even Ewan stopped rubbing his knuckle. Blair gathered the photographs. We are taking him to Strathbane. On what charge? For further questioning. And when word spreads? That is not my concern. It will be Ewan's. Blair looked pleased by that. Outside, the village had begun gathering at safe distances from the schoolhouse. No one admitted to watching. Mrs. Wellington examined the notice board for 20 uninterrupted minutes. Nessie Curry carried the same shopping bag past the gate twice, while Jessie waited near the post box to receive whatever Nessie learned. Ewan was led towards the police car. Morag stepped after him. I'm sure this will be cleared up. He stopped. You said that when the council blamed me for the broken hive stands, that was different. You knew the timber was rotten. Morag's expression tightened. This is not the time. No. It is only ever the time when you need something carried. He got into the car without another word. At Strathbane, Blair kept Ewan for 3 hours and produced nothing except greater anger. The station canteen offered Hamish a square of pudding so pale and heavy that it seemed to have lost confidence during cooking. He pushed it aside. Macnab sat opposite him with tea. The lab can confirm the paint, he said. Aye, but Blair will hold Kerr as long as he can. Aye, you sound pleased. I am thinking. That often looks like sulking from a distance. Hamish broke an oat biscuit in half. The marks on the latch were meant to connect Ewan to the room, but whoever placed them misunderstood the door. Macnab waited. You can only reach that inner edge while the door is open, Hamish said. If Ewan locked it from outside before Lydia arrived, the marks had to be made later. Unless he returned. Then he would need Lydia to let him in, or a second key. Macnab set down his cup. Morag has one. So does Cyanide. And the caretaker. Hamish thought of Morag's quick answer in the yard. I went home after the tea. Not, I never met Lydia. Blair entered the canteen. Kerr's being released, pending inquiry. Hamish raised an eyebrow. Your idea? The fiscal wants more. A fussy profession. Blair leaned over him. Do not interfere, Macbeth. Kerr did this. Then evidence will survive my looking at it. You always think you are cleverer than everyone else. No, said Hamish. Only you. Back in Lochdubh, Mrs. Patel met Hamish at the shop door with strong tea and honeyed oatcakes wrapped in paper. You have not eaten. I had lunch. At Strathbane? I was in the same room as lunch. She pushed the parcel into his hand. Across the road, Ewan climbed from MacNab's car. No one approached him. A woman who had once asked him to repair her chimney crossed to the opposite pavement. Nessie Curry stopped speaking when he passed. Jessie stopped a moment later. Ewan walked towards his van with his shoulders rigid. Hamish looked at the villagers, then at the bright blue photograph of the latch in his hand. Someone had placed those dots with calm precision. Ewan's temper made him easy to blame. That might have been the most useful thing about him. Chapter 6. Hamish spreads the wrong silence. Hamish made his mistake shortly after breakfast. He entered Patel's shop intending to ask one quiet question. Mrs. Patel was arranging honey jars beneath a sign Morag had forgotten to remove. Pure, local, community produced. Someone had crossed out community in pencil. Mrs. Patel followed Hamish's gaze. I did not do that. I didna ask. You were thinking it. Hamish placed the photograph of the shed latch on the counter. Did Lydia take the marked tasting jar with her? The one with the blue dot? No. Morag packed the tasting things after the tea. Are you certain? I remember because Dr. Vane asked for the jar, but Morag said it was needed for the launch display. Did the jar come back here? Mrs. Patel examined the shelves. No. Hamish nodded. And do me a favour. Say nothing yet about Cyanaide's honey possibly being sold under the co-op label. Mrs. Patel became still. I had not said anything. Good. But now I know there is something to say. There may be. That is why I want it kept quiet. I know how to keep things quiet. Hamish looked towards the window, where Nessie Curry was pretending to study the bus timetable. I am sure you do. Mrs. Patel lowered her voice. Was Cyanaide's honey stolen? I didna say that. Was it sold without her knowing? I didna say that either. Then, what did you say? That I need you not to repeat it. The shop bell rang. Nessie entered. Morning, she said, looking directly at Hamish's papers. Hamish covered them with one hand. Fine weather, Nessie added. Rain struck the window. Aye, Hamish said. Very fine. By 10:30, Jessie Curry had informed Mrs. Wellington that Hamish believed Cyanaide's honey had been stolen. By 11, someone told Ewan Kerr that Cyanide had been selling imported honey through the cooperative. At noon, Morag heard that Hamish had accused her of stealing grant money, forging labels and personally weakening 6 bee colonies. Hamish discovered this when Blair telephoned. What the hell are you doing? I am drinking tea. You've started a riot. There is no riot. There are 3 councillors ringing Strathbane. The grant committee wants a written statement, and Bain says you've accused her of fraud. I have accused no one. Then why does the whole village know? Because I asked Mrs. Patel not to tell anyone. There was silence. Even Blair required a moment. You asked Patel not to tell anyone? Ah, yeah. You bloody fool. That is unusually fair criticism. Blair threatened him with an official report, interference charges, and several disciplinary measures he did not have authority to impose. Hamish waited until he had finished. Did your people speak to the school caretaker? What caretaker? Exactly. He hung up and walked uphill towards Cyanide Bell's cottage. A handwritten note had been pinned to her gate. No honey for sale. No questions answered. Hamish knocked anyway. Go away, Cyanide called from inside. It is Hamish. I know your knock. I have never knocked here before. You knock apologetically. After a pause, the door opened several inches. Cyanide looked tired rather than angry. They are saying I cheated the village. I know. They are saying Morag stole from me. That may be nearer the truth, but I have not proved it. They are saying Ewan helped. That is nonsense. She opened the door fully. My telephone has rung 9 times. One woman from Inverness asked whether my honey contained sugar syrup. What did you tell her? That it contained bees, and she hung up. Hamish almost smiled. Do you know where the marked tasting jar went? No. Did Morag visit the shed after Lydia? Cyanide looked towards the hives. She often went late when labels needed doing. Last night? I didna see her. It was not an answer given carelessly. Hamish let it stand. As he returned downhill, he found Ewan beside his van scraping the words "Honey Thief" from the rear door with a blunt knife. "Who wrote that?" Hamish asked. "No idea. Any guesses?" "Half the village. The village doesna believe anything together for long. They believe enough." Ewan wiped the blade on his trousers. "Morag told people I mixed the batches without permission." "Did you?" "No. She told me which boxes to bring down. Sionade's supers usually went to the shed after dark because tourists were meant to see the new hives. Did that not strike you as odd?" "Everything Morag does strikes me as odd." She calls moving a table spatial planning. "Why did you keep helping?" Ewan looked towards Sionade's hill. "Because Sionade couldna lift the boxes alone." The answer was quiet, and without self-pity. Hamish left him to the van. The school caretaker, Archie McLean, lived in a narrow cottage behind the kirk. He answered the door, wearing slippers and holding a paintbrush. "I have nothing to tell the police. I have not asked anything yet. Blair's man did. And I saw nothing." Hamish looked at the wet paint on the doorframe. "Your wife helps Morag with the co-op accounts." Archie's grip tightened around the brush. "She only volunteers. No one is blaming her. They will. Folk always need another name when the first one stops being useful." Hamish waited. Archie siched. "I went to check the school boiler near midnight. I saw someone leaving the shed yard." "Who?" "I couldna see clearly." "Was it Morag?" Archie looked past Hamish towards the road. "She wore that green coat. Why did you tell McNab you saw nothing?" "Because my wife signed some of the forms. Morag said they were routine. If this becomes fraud, folk will say Elsie knew." "Did she?" "No. Then silence will no protect her. It will only protect whoever did." Archie closed his eyes. "It was Morag," he said. "A little after 12. She had something under her coat. A jar, perhaps." "Did she see you?" "I stepped behind the wall." Hamish thanked him and walked back towards the village. The rumour had done damage, but inside it lay one useful truth. Morag had returned to the honey shed hours after claiming she went straight home. At the harbour, the rain eased. Across the road, Mrs. Patel stood in her doorway with folded arms. "I told only my husband," she said. Hamish stopped. "And he told no one?" He asked Nessie whether she had heard anything. "That would do it." Mrs. Patel considered this. "Yes," she admitted. "That would do it." Hamish looked towards Morag's neat house above the village. He had tried to protect Sionade with silence. Instead, he had given Lochdubh an empty space, and the village had filled it with every shame it could imagine. Chapter 7. Sionade's Rough Hives. Sionade allowed Hamish through the gate the next morning, without asking whether he had come to apologise. This was fortunate, since he had. The garden behind her cottage was crowded with mint, nettles, rusting tools, and 3 chairs in different stages of collapse. Bees moved steadily among the late flowers. Nothing had been arranged for visitors, photographed for grants, or described as an experience. Sonsi sat on the dry stone wall above the hives, still as carved stone except for the tip of her tail. "She'll eat them," said Sionade. "She has no respect for local enterprise. She has no respect for anything. That makes her difficult to influence." Sionade led Hamish into the kitchen. Her tea was weak, her cups were chipped, and the table was covered with old invoices, string, wax, and 2 jars without labels. Hamish accepted the tea. "I have had worse." "You are lying." "Aye." Sionade sat opposite him. "Have you arrested Morag?" "No." "Then why are you here?" "To find out what she took." Sionade looked towards the window. "For years I sold honey from the house. Bell heather honey. Folk brought back the jars. I wrote the batch numbers myself. And then Morag became involved. She said I was undercharging. She was right. That admission seemed to cost her. She made new labels," Sionade continued. "Found shops willing to stock them. Got the school shed cleaned. I let her handle the talking because I hate talking to folk who call honey a product." "She helped you?" "At first." Sionade opened a drawer and removed a bundle of old labels tied with twine. The paper was cream, but simpler than the cooperative design. Bell Heather, honey. Cyanide Bell, Lochdubh. Small batch numbers had been printed along the bottom. Hamish compared one with a photograph of the co-op jar. The numbers are the same. A batch doesna become new because someone covers the name. Did you know she was doing that? I knew she wanted one co-op label. I thought my name would still be on it somewhere. Was it? Cyanide gave him a look. Hamish placed the labels on the table. Why did you not object? I did. What happened? She said customers preferred a community story. Said my jars looked old-fashioned and my cottage could not be used for visits. Because it is untidy? Because I told a grant woman that bees do not care about mission statements. That might have contributed. Cyanide almost smiled. Morag said the money would still come to me. And it did, mostly. More money than before. So you allowed it. I allowed her to sell my honey. I did not allow her to pretend the pretty hives made it. There was pride in the words, but also shame. Hamish recognized both. Cyanide had accepted the money because it made life easier. She had stayed quiet, because speaking would mean admitting how much had been taken while she was looking elsewhere. Did Lydia know? He asked. She suspected. She came here after the tea. Last night? Before 8. That was new. What did she say? She asked whether the prize jar was mine. I told her honey doesna carry a signature, but batch numbers do. Ah, yeah. Did she take anything? One of my old labels. Cyanide pushed the bundle towards him. A torn piece of twine hung loose where one label had been removed. She said she wanted to compare it with the jars in the shed. Was she angry? She was pleased with herself. That sounds more likely. Cyanide folded her arms. She said Morag could save the trail by correcting the paperwork and putting my name back. She thought folk would thank her for making them honest. They might not have. She did not understand Lochdubh. She had been here less than a day. That was enough time to correct everybody. Hamish glanced at the jars on the table. Did Morag ever come here to change labels? She used to sit where you are sitting. She would bring sheets from Inverness, peel off the old labels and put on the new ones. Here? At first. Later she did it in the shed. Did she ever mark the jars? Only batch numbers. What about blue paint? Cyanide shook her head. The Queen pen was Ewan's. He left it in the equipment basket for the launch. Hamish picked up one of the unlabelled jars. A faint ridge of old glue remained around the glass. Where did this come from? Last year's batch. Why no label? I took it off. Why? To see whether the new one covered the old properly. Hamish looked at her. Cyanide shrugged. I may be old. I am no blind. The old Bell label had not merely been replaced. It had been concealed beneath another story. Outside, Hamish examined the hives with Cyanide. The boxes were scratched, weathered, and full of life. Several lids carried faded blue marks where Ewan had painted repairs. This is the paint on his sleeve, Hamish said. Old fence paint. Thick stuff. Not queen marker paint. Of course not. Cyanide opened one hive and lifted a heavy frame. Bees crowded the comb. That honey in the shop came from here, she said. Not all of it, but most. How much? Enough that the trail would have no trail without it. Below them, the official hive stood in a neat row. From this height, they looked like coloured toys. Hamish thought of Morag's words. Cyanide has always been part of our shared journey. People often said shared when they meant someone else had done the difficult part. Why did Morag return to the shed after midnight? He asked. Cyanide replaced the frame. To remove something. What? Whatever Lydia found. Did Lydia have the marked tasting jar? No. Morag kept that. Hamish looked at her. You are sure? I saw Morag put it in her basket after the tea. The one with the blue spot on the lid. And Lydia? She had the old Bell label I gave her. The two pieces came together without yet forming proof. Lydia had entered the shed, carrying a label that exposed the honey's source. Morag still possessed the marked jar. Later she returned to the shed and left with something hidden beneath her coat. Hamish started towards the gate. Sionade called after him. "What happens to the honey? The case is about Lydia." "I know that." Her voice had gone quiet. "But what happens to my name?" Hamish turned. For all her bluntness, Sionade looked suddenly small beside the old hives. She had spent years among thousands of bees, and had still allowed one organised woman with a printer to make her disappear. "We put it back," he said. "You cannot promise that." "No." He looked down at the official trail, then at the labels in his hand. "But I can make it difficult for anyone to cover it again." Sunsy dropped soundlessly from the wall and vanished into the heather. Sionade watched her go. "Nothing owns that creature." "No," said Hamish. "But she knows when something has been taken." Chapter 8. The label under the label. The rain cleared before noon, leaving the schoolyard washed and bright. Hamish returned to the honey shed with Macnab. Blair had gone to question Ewan again, which meant Ewan was probably being asked the same questions more loudly. Inside, the shed looked tidier than it had after Lydia's death. The body was gone. The stool had been removed, and the scattered labels had been gathered into evidence bags. Yet something about the shelves bothered Hamish. He examined the remaining jars. "Look at this." One cooperative label had lifted slightly at the corner. Beneath it showed a thin edge of cream paper. Macnab used tweezers to raise it. The words underneath appeared slowly. "Bale, heather, honey." "Same jar. 2 names," Macnab said. Hamish checked another. Then a third. All carried the newer co-op labels over Sionade's old ones. "The honey is genuine," Hamish said. "It is the story on the jar that is false. That gives Morag a reason to silence Lydia. A reason is no proof of murder." On the workbench lay the equipment basket from Patel's shop. The smoker and hive tool were present. The blue queen marking pen was still missing. Hamish examined the 6 circular spaces on the dusty shelf. One jar had been removed. "The tasting jar," he said. Macnab nodded. Archie saw Morag carrying something after midnight. She came back to remove the jar Lydia had marked. "Why not destroy it?" "Perhaps she couldna bring herself to throw away good honey." "Or evidence." "Morag sees herself as practical. Practical folk often keep the very thing they should burn." They searched the shed again, but found no marked jar. Hamish returned home in the afternoon. The damp patch had spread south and now looked less like Scotland than a country that had lost a war. Mrs. Patel had left a covered dish on the table and a note. "Eat this. Do not put it under the leak." Luggs inspected the dish, found it closed and sat beside it hopefully. Hamish removed his wet jacket. Something pale lay on the doorstep. At first he thought it was a dead leaf. Then he saw honey glistening along one edge. It was a torn strip of paper. Sunsy sat on the wall beyond the cottage, washing one paw as if she had no connection to it. Hamish picked up the strip. Part of the cooperative's purple heather design remained visible. Beneath it clung a scrap of older cream paper. Near the torn edge was one small blue dot. "Sunsy." The cat continued washing. "Where did you find this?" Sunsy looked towards the row of houses above the village, then dropped from the wall and disappeared. Luggs watched her go, clearly offended by investigative methods that did not involve food. Hamish placed the paper in an envelope and telephoned Macnab. An hour later, they stood outside Morag Bain's house. Morag opened the door wearing a cream blouse and no green waterproof coat. Without her clipboard, she appeared less official and more tired. "I have already answered your questions. We need to see your kitchen," Macnab said. "Why?" Hamish held up the envelope. "A piece of label was found near your back garden." "Found by whom?" "Sunsy." Morag stared at him. "The wildcat? She doesn't fill out statements." "This is ridiculous." Macnab produced the necessary authority from Strathbane. Blair had objected until Macnab mentioned the Grant investigation and the possibility of newspaper interest. Morag stepped aside. Her kitchen was spotless. Jars of flour, tea, and rice stood in matching containers. Cup handles faced the same direction. Even the fruit bowl seemed organised by size. "No honey?" Hamish asked. "I gave the co-op stock to the police." "All of it?" "Yes." A door beside the cooker led to a narrow pantry. Morag moved slightly in front of it. Too slightly. Hamish looked at her. Anything private in there? Food is generally private. Macnab opened the door. The pantry contained preserves, cleaning supplies, and several jars wrapped in brown paper. At the back, behind a tin of baking powder, stood one jar of dark heather honey. Its lid carried a tiny blue dot. Morag closed her eyes. Macnab lifted it carefully. The cooperative label looked newly applied. One corner had not stuck properly. Beneath it was the faded edge of another label. Hamish did not need to peel it fully to know what it said. Bell heather honey, he said. Morag leaned against the counter. That proves nothing about Lydia. It proves this is the tasting jar, Hamish replied. Lydia marked the lid in Patel's shop. You took it after the tea. I was responsible for the display. You carried it to the shed. No. You returned there after midnight and brought it home. Morag's face tightened. Archie McLean saw you. He could not have seen clearly. He recognized your coat. Half the village owns green coats. But only one co-op chair had reason to hide this jar. Hamish pointed to the blue mark beneath the raised paper edge. When Lydia handled the jar, it had the co-op label. The pen leaked onto the lid and under a loose corner. Later, you removed that label, found Cyanede's old label beneath it, and pasted on another co-op label. Morag said nothing. You were trying to cover the evidence Lydia had already uncovered, he continued, but the blue paint remained under the paper. It was my cooperative, she said quietly. No, said Hamish. It was Cyanede's honey. I found the grants. I designed the trail. I persuaded shops to take the jars. Without me, she would still be selling them from a dirty table beside her door. And without her? Morag looked at the jar. Outside, a car door slammed. Blair's voice carried from the road, already demanding to know why no one had waited for him. Morag straightened. You cannot prove I killed Lydia. Not with a jar alone. For a moment, relief touched her face. Hamish saw it, and knew. But you have just told me something useful, he said. What? You said, killed. Her face went blank. We never told you whether Lydia was struck, pushed, or died in an accident. Macnab became very still. Morag looked towards the pantry, then towards the back door. Blair entered the kitchen without knocking. What have you found? Hamish took the marked jar from Macnab and placed it on the table. A label over a label, he said. And the woman who knew what happened before we told her. The blue dot shone on the lid, small and bright. It had been intended to identify the queen at the heart of a hive. Instead, it had marked the heart of the lie. Chapter 9. The Honey Trail Meeting. The meeting to discuss the future of the Honey Trail began at 7 in the old schoolroom. Morag had not organised it, which may have been why nearly everyone attended. Mrs. Patel provided tea. Mrs. Wellington brought shortbread she claimed had been intended for visitors. Nessie and Jessie Curry occupied chairs near the door, where information could reach them without obstruction. Ewan stood alone beside the window. The words, honey thief, had been scrubbed from his van, but a pale shadow remained. Morag sat at the front between Blair and Macnab. She wore her green waterproof coat despite the warmth of the room. Her clipboard rested on her knees. At 7 precisely, she stood. This community has suffered a profound shock, she began. But I believe that, through resilience and shared purpose— Sit down, Morag, said Cyanade. A cup rattled against its saucer. Morag looked towards her. I am trying to protect what we created. You are trying to give the last speech. Blair rose heavily. That's enough. This is now a police matter. He looked towards Ewan with such purpose that Hamish stepped into the centre of the room. Aye, Hamish said. So perhaps we should get it right. Blair's face darkened. I know how to conduct an arrest. You have demonstrated the enthusiasm. A few people lowered their eyes. Mrs. Patel poured tea to hide a smile. Hamish placed the blue-marked honey jar on the table. This began with a simple question. Could the new community hives have produced all the honey being sold under their name? Morag folded her hands. We have already acknowledged that Cyanade contributed. Contributed? Cyanade repeated. Hamish continued. Dr. Vane inspected the new hives. The colonies were weak, the frames nearly clean, and the yield far too small. She then visited Cyaneid's hives and found strong colonies producing honey with the same floral and smoky character as the prize jars. One of the councillors shifted uncomfortably. "The honey was genuine," Hamish said. "But it came mostly from Cyaneid's hives. Her old bell labels were covered with co-op labels, and her name disappeared." Morag spoke calmly. "The jars were marketed collectively. Cyaneid received payment. That does not answer why the grant document suggested the photographed hives produced the honey. The project was developing, on paper, faster than the bees." A soft murmur passed through the room. Hamish lifted the jar. At Patel's shop, Lydia used the blue queen-marking pen. It leaked onto her finger and left a dot on this lid. She later realized the batch number matched Cyaneid's honey. Morag looked at the jar but said nothing. "After the tea," Hamish continued, "Lydia visited Cyaneid and took one of the old bell labels. She went to the shed to compare it with the co-op jars and records." He turned towards Morag. "You met her there." "I went home. Archie McLean saw you leaving the shed yard after midnight. That was later. I went to check the stock after hearing what had happened. What had happened was not discovered until morning." Morag's fingers tightened around the clipboard. Blair turned sharply towards her. Hamish said, "You knew Lydia was in the shed because you went there shortly after 8. Morag looked around the room. Every face was turned towards her. "She threatened the entire project," she said. "She offered to let it continue," Hamish replied, "if the paperwork was corrected and Cyaneid's name restored. She did not understand what I had built. You told us that before. I found the money. I dealt with the council. I persuaded businesses to stock the jars. Cyaneid would never have done any of it." "No," Cyaneid said. "I only made the honey." Morag flinched. Hamish rested one hand on the table. "Lydia had the old label. You had the marked jar. In the shed, she showed you that the batch numbers matched. She intended to take the jar and the records to the grant committee. She enjoyed humiliating people." "Aye," Hamish said. "She could be cruel with the truth. But it was still the truth." Morag stood abruptly. She was on the stool, reaching for the stock ledger. "I tried to take the jar from her. The room seemed to shrink. She pulled it away," Morag continued. "I caught her arm. The stool moved," Blair said. "And she fell?" Morag stared at the floor. She struck the extractor. Hamish remembered Lydia's coat folded beneath her shoulder. "You tried to help her at first. I put the coat under her head. I called her name. Why did you not call for an ambulance?" Morag's mouth trembled. She was not breathing. "I thought of the grant. The labels. Everything people would say." "So you let Ewan take the blame," Hamish said. "I did not plan that. You saw the paint on his sleeve during the tea." Morag said nothing. "You used the leaking queen pen to leave fresh dots on the inside latch and the hive tool. You placed the tool near the door and mixed the label sheets to make the room look disturbed. You left the old blue paint on Ewan's sleeve to complete the story." Ewan's voice came from the window. "You knew Blair would choose me." Morag looked at him. "I thought the police would see it was an accident. After they arrested me? I was frightened. So was I." There was no anger in his voice now. That was worse. Hamish picked up the jar again. "You returned after midnight to remove this. Archie saw you leave with it beneath your coat. At home, you peeled back the co-op label and found the bell label underneath. Then you pasted on a fresh one." MacNab raised the loose corner with a gloved finger. Beneath the paper, the old name and the small blue paint mark were visible. "The dot proves it is the jar from the tasting," Hamish said. "It was marked before Lydia died, and relabeled afterwards." Blair stepped forward. "You also knew she had been killed before anyone told you whether her death was an accident or assault." Morag closed her eyes. "I did not mean for her to die." "Perhaps not," said Hamish. "But after she fell, every choice you made was meant to save your story at the cost of someone else's life." Morag looked towards Cyaneid. "I made people value your honey. You made them value a picture of yourself helping me. I made the cooperative possible." Hamish's voice was gentle. Making something presentable is not the same as making it yours. The clipboard slipped from Morag's hands and struck the floor. No one moved to pick it up. McNab led her outside. Blair followed, speaking loudly about procedure, though he had not once looked at Ewan. For several moments the room remained silent. Then Mrs. Wellington crossed to the window. "My garden gate is still sticking," she told Ewan. He looked at her. "I had intended to ask you to repair it." "Did you?" "No. I crossed the road when I saw you yesterday." Ewan waited. Mrs. Wellington straightened her cardigan. "That was poorly done." It was not a graceful apology, but it was an honest one. "I'll look at the gate," Ewan said. Mrs. Patel placed a cup of tea beside him without asking whether he wanted it. Sionade moved to stand nearby, close enough to be understood but not close enough to embarrass him. Around the room, people began speaking in low voices. Some discussed the grant, others discussed the jars. A few discussed how certain they had always been that Ewan was innocent. Nessie leaned towards Jessie. "We did say the blue paint might mean nothing." "You said it meant everything," Jessie whispered. "I was repeating what people believed." Hamish let them settle the matter between themselves. The village had wanted the honey trail to prove that Lochdubh was generous, wholesome, and united. Instead, it had shown how easily a community could praise shared labour while allowing one person's name to be covered and another person's shame to be used. Mrs. Patel handed Hamish a plate. "You have not eaten." "I have been solving a murder. That is not food." On the plate were 2 oatcakes and a slice of honey cake. Hamish took one. Outside, MacNab's car disappeared down the wet road, with Morag in the back. Beyond the schoolhouse, the slopes rose dark beneath the evening sky. The official hives stood in their pretty painted row. Farther uphill, Sionade's rough boxes were still full of bees. Chapter 10. Bell, Heather, Honey. The honey trail did not reopen the following morning. The painted stall remained beneath its canvas cover, and the school bee costume was returned to a cupboard before anyone had to wear it. For several days, Lochdubh spoke of cancelling the whole enterprise. Then Mrs. Patel placed 3 jars in her window. Their labels were plain. Bell, Heather, Honey, Sionade Bell, Lochdubh. By lunchtime, 2 had sold. Sionade came into the shop and stared at the remaining jar. "The lettering is too large." "It can be read," Mrs. Patel said. "The old labels were smaller. The old labels did not sell beyond your gate." "They sold enough." Mrs. Patel folded her arms. "You may have your name, or your modesty. There is not room for both on this label." Sionade bought the jar herself, claiming she needed to test it. The trail eventually returned in a smaller form. Visitors were shown the painted community hives, but no one pretended they had produced the season's entire crop. The walk continued farther uphill to Sionade's battered boxes, where she explained bees without simplifying them for brochures. Some tourists disliked her manner. One woman asked whether the hives could be made more picturesque. "No," Sionade replied. "The bees have voted." Others liked the rough honesty of the place. They bought more honey than Morag's projections had predicted. Ewan repaired the shed latch and refused payment. 2 days later, someone left a new set of drill bits in his van. Mrs. Wellington's gate stopped sticking. The words scrubbed from his rear door faded, though they did not vanish completely. Apologies came to him indirectly. A bag of kindling appeared outside his house. A neighbour brought over a broken chair and did not mention crossing the road to avoid him. Mrs. Patel added an extra oatcake to his lunch parcel, which in Lochdubh was almost a public ceremony. Blair arrived during the first renewed hive walk, wearing a new protective veil. He addressed a group of visitors with confidence. "The mother wasp remains in the centre, while the other bees collect the pollen." A small boy raised his hand. "She's a queen bee." Blair stared through the mesh. "That's what I said." "No, it wasn't." Hamish stood nearby and made no attempt to help. Later, Blair informed the councillors that his early questioning of Ewan had been a deliberate method of applying pressure elsewhere. MacNab asked where the pressure had been applied. Blair said that was confidential. Hamish returned home before dark to find a roofer's card pinned to his door and a covered pot on the step. Mrs. Patel's note read, "He will come tomorrow. Do not hide." Inside, the damp patch had spread beyond Scotland into waters unknown to cartography. Lugs inspected the food parcel first, then settled beside the stove while Hamish lit the fire. On the table stood one jar of bell heather honey. Sionade had left it without a note. Beneath the new label, a faint line of old glue remained on the glass. Hamish spread some honey on an oatcake. It was dark, smoky, and not entirely sweet. Outside, the last light touched the heather slopes. Far above the painted hives, Sunsea crossed the wall beside Sionade's garden and disappeared among the rough grass. The cat had no interest in grants, labels, or shared identities. She simply knew the ground she walked upon. Hamish ate another oatcake as the kettle began to boil. Lochdubh had kept its honey trail. It was less polished now, and less impressive in photographs. It was also true, Lochdubh did not stop selling honey. It only stopped pretending that a neat label could replace an honest name. For a while, people looked more carefully at the hands behind every jar. The blue pen had been designed to mark the queen at the heart of a hive. Instead, its little dot revealed the heart of a lie, the point where one woman's labour had been covered by another woman's story. Community is a fine word. Yet it becomes greedy when it swallows the person who did the work. Praise shared fairly is sweetness. Praise quietly taken is theft, even when tied with a ribbon. The kettle boiled, the oatcakes disappeared, and bell heather honey sold better than anyone admitted expecting. Can a good cause remain good after it forgets whose hands made it possible? Thank you for returning to Lochdubh. And when the village blames the lad with paint on his sleeve, Hamish follows a blue dot to the person who stole another woman's bees.